So I'm Norris, and I am a female football coach at Bradford City Women's, and also more importantly I am a PhD student at Leeds Becker University with my thesis on a qualitative investigation of social support among sports coaches. So the second part of the conceptualisation of social support. So the title for this one was Sports Coaches, Social Support Resources and Perceptions of Social Support and Stresses. Social support is like a multi-dimensional concept, so it changes over time. So for this one it was more of a longitudinal study. A lot of the previous research with sports coaches has been cross-sectional, so looking at one time point. There's been very little research looking at social resources longitudinally in sport in general. There's a paper by Rees and Hardy in 2000 which uses these 4 types of social support resources to study social support and stresses in athletes, but again this is a cross-sectional one, and that tends to focus more on injury side when it comes to athletes, because injury is a particularly stressful time for athletes where they can often get isolated. Social support, where it's a multi-dimensional construct, so it can change over time. Depending on what the situation is will depend on what social support network and resources are required. So the methods for this study was again qualitative, so semi-structured interviews, 3 interviews over a 6-week period, so it was 1 interview, then 3 weeks after that was another interview, and then 3 weeks after that was another interview. And we did this with 10 coaches rather than 12 because it's harder to maintain participants or interviewees over that extended period of time. During the first interview, the focus of the interview guide was social support resources that they'd had up until that point. Talking about a little bit around who they've used and why they've used them and how they've used them and how it's been effective for them. And then at the end of the interview, I gave them a task to do for the second interview, which is called Interviewee Aided Photo Elicitation, which in short term is basically giving them some set criteria and asking them to go and take some pictures of things based on that criteria. So I gave them a form which the criteria are based on up to 4 photos on how they perceive themselves within their social support network, up to 4 photos of how they perceive their social network, and up to 4 photos on anything else that they would like to, or they think is important with regards to their social network. So then the second interview was again starting off talking about social support resources, what social support have they used since last time, what social support they'd used since last time, or if they'd used it, was it helpful? Then we also looked at, the second part of it was talking about the photos. So I had the photos out that I printed off and basically said to the interviewees, tell me about these, and we sort of went through each of the photos, and they said why this was really important, or why they'd taken that photo or got it off the internet, what was in it, and just discussed around it and asked questions around that. And then finally we had a third interview, again 3 weeks after that, which again the first bit was on the social support resources, so what type of social support they used since last time, who had they used, etc, etc. But instead of looking at the photo elicitation bit, this time we discussed social support resources with stressors. We talked about the 4 different types and how can they provide me an example of how that has helped them when they've been stressed. We talked about how do they feel it was effective helping them when they were stressed. We also discussed a little bit about which one do they think was most effective to help them deal with stresses. So in regards to results of this study, the first bit around the social support resources was that informational support was used the most throughout. Again, this was a variety of different things, such as just advice on training drills, which coaches consistently want to try and develop. There was informational support around more organisational aspects this time. Then linking into the emotional support, which was the second one, this coach was getting very frustrated around the fact that she felt that she wasn't felt as part of the group, and that her application wasn't being necessarily assessed the way she felt, so she was getting very frustrated around that, and this was affecting her coaching. Again, it's things like equipment or time, getting frustrated around not having or having a lack of equipment, not having the right equipment, and being able to do their job effectively. Then again it was instrumental support more this time, so it was instrumental support from maybe other coaches who could cover the sessions for them if need be. Again it was family, so going home, maybe a partner having cooked a meal for when they get home if they get home quite late. Then you've also got, to a lesser extent, the appraisal support. Most of the coaches, they felt pretty confident and they had a lot of self-confidence stuff in themselves. It's very interesting photos. Coaches tend to perceive themselves as the centre. This was shown in a number of different ways. So there was a couple of coaches who took pictures from the internet of pyramids and said that that was them in the centre of the pyramid and people above or below them in that aspect. There was one that talked about it in the case of a spider web and that they were the spider in the centre and that there was little flies around that were their support network that they could go to. One more talked about them as a lift and how they're in the lift. This is a more dynamic one about how there's not necessarily a ceiling to the lift. It just keeps going up and down depending on who they want and what type of, which links into that multidimensional aspect of social support. They put a lot of emphasis on the fact that it was directional relationships. So it wasn't just they were always getting support from their network, it was a case of they were giving support back. So they had that aspect is there. There was one that I found really interesting, which was a photo in relation to Where's Wally? So they talked about that when you need social support, you're looking for this one person that you know will offer you the advice, and that's the Where's Wally in this situation. However, within the photo, there's a number of different people that look like Where's Wally, but isn't that person. You can go to them and they'll give you advice, but it isn't the advice necessarily that you need. And I found that really interesting about how, of course, there's those different people you can go to, but we need to be able to find, that one that not necessarily gives us the advice that we want to hear, but gives us the right advice or the most appropriate advice to help us with that situation. And then finally, when it comes to the social support and stresses, all 4 types of resources were used for main and stress buffering effects. The predominant one was emotional, closely followed by informationals. It seems that emotional and informational support are clearly the 2 most important ones for coaches. They're consistently the top 2. Predominantly it was stress buffering effects that it had because they wanted to get advice and stuff beforehand rather than in the situation. But it had main, and all of them had main as stress buffering effects.